Today has been truly an event-filled day with a lot of knowledge around environmental justice in North Carolina and across the nation and world. But today has also been an opportunity for us to begin to really challenge and think through those intellectual silos that frustrate our opportunities to talk across social, political, cultural, and intellectual boundaries. In many ways, that is the very raison d'etre of this Mellon Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative. It's an opportunity for us to begin to talk across those intellectual boundaries. For, as Sherry White-Newsome reminds us, that environmental justice is not about one thing, it is everything. It is our capacious umbrella under which all that we do, all that we think, and all that we are fall. So I'm very pleased about this event, and I want to publicly thank two key organizers for this event. This event would not have taken place without them. First, White-Newsome, our program and project coordinator for the Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative. Let's thank Melba. When Melba calls, we all respond. We just say where, when, and when do we show up, and how do we need to show up. The second person I want to thank is truly an amazing individual who joined Wake Forest University less than a year ago and has been a true partner in all that we've done, both at this Mellon initiative and also in African American studies. She does everything with grace, elegance, and flair, and really has organized a beautiful day for us all. And I want to thank her publicly. Thank you, Sarah Goldstein. Today we don't so much as conclude our day together as we are going to receive in many ways charges for our work ahead from two long-distance runners in the environmental justice movement, and more importantly, two long-distance runners who are dedicated to building a more just and sustainable world. I'll introduce them. They'll then come up and each will offer us their remarks, and then we'll have a brief moment for conversation, and then we'll have an opportunity to retire to a reception in Farrell Hall, and right outside of Farrell Hall for our reception. We'll move around Farrell Hall. See, Melba had. We'll move to our reception where we will continue the conversation. Peggy Shepard is co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice and has a long history of organizing and engaging Northern Manhattan residents in community-based planning and campaigns to address environmental protection and environmental health policy, both locally and nationally. She has successfully combined grassroots organizing, environmental advocacy, and environmental health community-based participatory research to become a national leader in advancing environmental policy and the perspective of environmental justice in urban communities. And that perspective seeks to ensure that the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment extends to all. She has been named co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, as well as chair of the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, and was the first female chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She also serves on the executive committee of the National Black Environmental Justice Network and the Board of Advisors of the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. Her work has received broad recognition. She's received the Jane Jacobs Medal from the Rockefeller Foundation for Lifetime Achievement, the 10th Annual Heinz Award for the Environment, the William K. Riley Award for Environmental Leadership, the Knight of the National Order of Merit from the French Republic, the Damu Smith Power of One Award, the Dean's Distinguished Service Award from Columbia University's Millman School of Public Health. She's also received 2 honorary doctorates from Smith College and Lawrence University. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Peggy Shepard.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. So again, it's great to see you all. Thank you for that wonderful panel. I used to be a journalist, not an environmental journalist, because it was a long time ago, and where I was in Indianapolis didn't have environmental journalism, but I understand all of that takes. So thank you, all of you who were in that panel doing that work. Very, very important, because we've got to ensure that the real story is being told, and that story is generally told by people who've lived it. So thank you all very much. So again, we're a community-based organization. We act for environmental justice. We have a federal policy office in Washington, D.C. We started about 10 years ago, and our Dr. Jalonne was our first director of the office. She was working all by herself to get an office started in Washington that would really really have a perspective of environmental justice in Congress, on the Hill, and be able to bring grassroots groups from around the country to talk to their legislators and have their voices heard. So again, thank you, Jalonne, for taking the chance on a little organization with doing a startup in DC. Thank you very much. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this Environmental and Epistemic Justice Summit here at Wake Forest. I really know how powerful it is to bring students and scholars and activists together to examine how and in what ways race and regimes of racial knowledge really shape and inform our academic practice and public policies. Now, I started out as a student at Howard University with the goal to become a journalist and magazine editor, which I did achieve. Worked for Essence, Black Enterprise magazine, back in the day when those were very, very important publications. But you know, I soon found out that working as a journalist, I was writing about what my editors thought was important, but not the issues that were really important to me. And so I eventually found my way into politics, working as a speechwriter and communications lead on Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign. And after we failed to win the nomination, a mentor of mine asked me if I was happy behind the scenes or would I prefer to be out front, leading the changes that we all hope to see. So I decided to step forward and be that agent of change. Now, I started locally, of course, as that's where all politics begin. I became the Democratic District Leader for West Harlem, and when I wasn't busy fighting the old guard, the old boys network that had long dominated Harlem's politics, I was really working to improve my community. So that's when I really learned about the North River Sewage Treatment Plant, which was being built on the Hudson River in West Harlem. Now, our initial response was to see if we could get jobs for our community. But once the plant became operational, the stench and emissions from the open sewage tanks was unbearable. And we soon discovered that the emissions from the plant's smokestacks were in violation of the Clean Air Act. Now, this plant was supposed to have been built further south in a wealthy, predominantly white neighborhood, but the residents there and the developers had the resources and connections to push back, forcing the city to relocate the plant. So, you know, they came uptown to West Harlem, arguably the worst place in all of Manhattan to build a plant, and they chose a site along the Hudson River that happens to be one of the highest elevations in Manhattan, meaning they would have to pump the sewage uphill to get it to the plant. But they knew there wouldn't be organized resistance, and at the time, the residents of Harlem had a lot of other things on their mind. Now, that's the way they approached us, the whole Trojan horse of jobs. Now, this is all too common when citing sources of pollution in our communities by promising people jobs. But what they bring with these jobs is pollution and the adverse health impacts that it causes. Now, at the time, I didn't really know what environmental justice was. Few people did. But as we began to do battle over the pollution from the sewage treatment plant, I quickly learned. But let's go back to some basic concepts. I know that all of you are familiar with the term environmental racism. It's the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our communities thrust those issues into the national spotlight with a Harvard study. And we realized that the cumulative impacts of decades of disparate exposure to environmental hazards really proved to be a significant factor in the alarmingly higher rates of infection and morbidity in our communities. And what the Harvard study found was that more people of color died in the communities that had poor air quality. And they did another study that showed the increments of PM2.5 and the impact on morbidity as well. Obviously, you've heard about climate justice. We use that to describe the movement to address the climate crisis in a just and equitable way. And you know, when we're working to shore up our waterfronts against the threat of the next superstorm Sandy, we really have to develop policies and practices that not only protect the waterfront of wealthy neighborhoods, but also the waterfront neighborhoods like Harlem, East Harlem, and the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. So as we really pursue climate justice, we often talk about a just transition. And that refers to shifting from an economy run on fossil fuels, which are the cause of climate change, to one that's powered by renewable energy, as mandated by our local law 97 in New York City. And to make that transition just, we have to ensure that communities of color are not left behind. And our local law 97 basically says that because 80% of our emissions are coming from buildings, we have a building decarbonization initiative throughout New York City and the state to ensure that our buildings, again, come under, that our buildings are safe and healthy and not emitting, particulates, not emitting, the toxins that have really created such a disaster in our communities. And so I also learned that communities of color, low income, and indigenous really face a higher burden of exposure to pollutants and other environmental hazards, which leads them to suffer disproportionately higher adverse health impacts. And yet race is the primary factor. An average middle income Black family with a $60,000 income is likely to live with more pollution than a white family making $10,000 a year. That's pretty sobering. And also studies show that people of color and Black Americans in particular are subjected to disproportionate amounts of pollution from nearly every source imaginable, including industry, transportation, agriculture, construction, and of course, air pollution has been linked with a variety of cancers, including cancer of the lung, breast, liver, and pancreas. Now, this is not only true for air pollution, but also for other sources. In fact, Blacks are 75% more likely than other populations to live near a facility that produces hazardous waste. And the worst example of this is certainly in Louisiana, where an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans has come to be known as Cancer Alley, where there are close to 150 petrochemical plants located in predominantly Black communities, a real environmental sacrifice zone that produces 25% of the petrochemicals in the United States. And the cancer rates in some of these communities are 50 times higher than the national average. Now, compounding this, studies also show that Black communities have higher death rates from many types of cancer. For example, Black women are 42% more likely to die from breast cancer than their white counterparts, and Black men with prostate cancer are twice as likely to die from it than their white counterparts. And so, similar to this disparate exposure to pollution connected with cancer, we find that the reason for the higher morbidity is driven by inequities in everything from access to health care, lack of insurance, discrimination and bias within the healthcare system, all of which is rooted in discrimination. Now, we understand that this environmental racism results from a really complex legacy of housing segregation, land use and zoning discrimination, and inequitable environmental law enforcement. We know that systemic and institutional environmental injustice results in these disparate exposures to hazards in polluting facilities. And there's growing evidence that this isn't a coincidence. In the early 20th century, local and federal officials, usually white, enacted policies that reinforced racial segregation in cities and diverted investment away from minority neighborhoods in ways that created large disparities in the urban heat environment. And we know that the consequences are being felt today. In the 30s, the federal government created maps of hundreds of cities, rating the riskiness of different neighborhoods for real estate investment by giving them grades. Black and immigrant neighborhoods were typically rated hazardous and outlined in red to imply that they were not a suitable place for investment. And for decades, people in these redlined areas were denied access to federally backed mortgages and other credit, which of course sparked a cycle of disinvestment. Now, the New York Times has reported on a study finding that formerly redlined neighborhoods are today 5 degrees hotter in summer on average than white areas once favored for housing loans, with some of these cities seeing differences as large as 12 degrees. And we have found in New York City, from East Harlem to the Upper East Side, which large income disparities there, that on the same day, we can have 10 to 15 degree difference. So the urban heat island effect, certainly in urban cities, is very significant. Within New York City, 50% of the people who die from extreme heat are Black residents, most of whom do not have an air conditioner. With all of the units of public housing we have, less than 50% of people living in public housing have air conditioning. And so we have been very able to get the city to think about air conditioning. During COVID, they gave out air conditioners, but guess what? If you don't subsidize the energy costs, people can have an air conditioner, but they're not going to turn it on because they can't afford to pay that energy bill. So energy justice is a very, very significant issue. And I don't know if you all interact with your utility company here, but again, yes, shaking their heads. So I'm sure that's a problem, and it's a problem everywhere. So again, energy justice is something we really have to consider because we know that there are 30 million households in this country today that cannot pay those utility bills and need some real help. So we also know that these redline neighborhoods, they still remain lower income and more likely to have Black or Hispanic residents, fewer trees, fewer parks that help cool the air. They have more paved surfaces, such as asphalt lots, nearby highways that absorb and radiate heat. And each Black neighborhood, no matter its income level, was outlined in red and deemed a hazardous area for housing loans. And so many cities were already segregated before the 30s by racial zoning laws, restrictive covenants that really barred Black families from moving into white neighborhoods. But these redlining maps really deepened the pattern of racial inequality in ways that have lasted for decades. Even white families could easily get more loans and federal assistance to buy homes. When the GI Bill was passed, white returning soldiers could get loans to go to college and to buy homes, but that was denied to the Black soldiers that were returning. So we understand that neighborhoods with white homeowners had more clout to lobby city governments for all of these amenities, and Black neighborhoods just did not have that. and they also had home ownership declining and landlords rarely investing in green space. So city planners really targeted redlined area as cheap land for new businesses, highways, warehouses, public housing, and I think the disparities in access to housing finance really create a snowball effect that was compounded over generations. Now, Congress outlawed redlining in the 70s, but the practice has really left remaining marks on cities. And even today, cities rarely consider racial and income equity when they're developing climate plans and measures and green benefits like green roofs, solar installations. Rarely are they targeted to our communities, but that is starting to change. And, back in Harlem, in our fight against the sewage treatment plant, I really learned the importance and the power of community organizing. As we began to educate ourselves about environmental justice, we had the Toxic Waste and Race Report in 1986. One of the co-founders of my organization, We Act for Environmental Justice, Bernice Miller-Travis, was a researcher right out of grad school on toxic waste and race. And so I had that kind of scientific basis for Bernice and I to go to meetings and go to the city and start talking about environmental justice. And of course, nobody had ever heard those words. And they were like, what is that? And so we've spent the last 36 years letting the city know what environmental justice is about. So in terms of community organizing, we understood that we had to do something urgent in order to get attention and to get in the New York Times, which matters, or used to matter a lot. So we protested. We got arrested on Martin Luther King Day in 1988. 7 of us got arrested for blocking the West Side Highway at rush hour. And, we were called the Sewage Seven. And we were arrested. One of the people included David Patterson, who eventually became our governor, briefly, and other community folks. So it was really, really important, and the first time that kind of protest had been held in Harlem in years. So we also filed a lawsuit against the city, and it was our good friend David Dinkins, who had just become mayor, and because he had lived uptown and experienced what we were experiencing, he got into office and said, there's a problem here and we're going to fix it. But I knew that we had to sue because, David might not be in office. He was a one-term mayor, and we needed a real mandate for what should happen at the plant in perpetuity. So we filed a lawsuit. The mayor committed $55 million to fix what was a brand new plant. He made my organization and the Natural Resource Defense Council, which was our pro bono council, they made us a monitor of a 5-year plan to fix the plant. They gave us money to hire an engineer to ensure that the work had been done. And, we were off and running. And they even signed a $1.1 million environmental benefits fund for West Harlem. And so we realized that it was so important to do the years of information. It took us a 6-year fight to make this happen because, everything's about the political moment. And we had Mayor Koch, who never even liked to come uptown and talk to elected officials of color. And he was like, there's no problem. And of course, when Dinkins got there, he was like, yeah, there's a problem. Let's get this fixed. So our next major campaign was focused on air pollution as well. And this was our Dump Dirty Diesel campaign. And it sought to address the fact that out of the 7 bus depots that were in Manhattan, all 6 were above 99th Street. So we were hosting 1/3 of the largest diesel bus fleet in the country. And again, we filed a Title VI complaint with the Department of Transportation. I think this was during the Reagan Reagan or Nixon administration, and it didn't go anywhere. But interestingly enough, at the bus shelters that we have in New York City, they now have an informational bulletin that tells people how to file a Title VI complaint. And so when I see that, I'm like, yeah, because I know we're the only ones who've ever done it. So I'm like, okay, they learned a little bit. But even though we didn't win, they started meeting with us every month. And I'm talking about a transit authority that was as far away from community as you can imagine. They were not the kind of authority that got involved. And so we were now meeting with them every single month. We also worked with the bus riders union. And so they would stop at our office and tip us off as to what was going on inside of the depots. And of course, we understood how important that was, because when a bus driver in New York City retires, many of them only live another 5 years. And so the air pollution that we're experiencing out in the community, they are experiencing in that depot. And so we wanted to ensure that the provisions we were trying to make were not going to put any further burden on the workers. And so we had a very strong relationship, and we did rallies together. And I think, again, that was very, very important. And so it's interesting, when we work with other folks, we had a Dump Dirty Diesel campaign, and so the NRDC had one, and we all got the governor to purchase 300 natural gas buses. And the next thing I know, NRDC takes a full-page ad in the New York Times thanking the governor. And I'm like, what are you doing? They were like, well, the depots were never our issue. They weren't their issue. So they got their little 300 buses and they took off. And so we stayed in that fight. And it was an 18-year fight that was really helped by our work with the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health, their Children's Environmental Health Center. And so partnerships have been really, really crucial for us, because we understand that the impacts on health are a foundational element of environmental justice if we're going to achieve that. And so it turned out that there was a close nexus between what the community wanted to know and what Columbia was trying to find out. And so they had a study of about 720 Black and Latino women from Harlem and the Bronx. They were pregnant, they wore backpack air monitors so that we understood the impact of fine particles in diesel on the growing child. And we learned an amazing amount over the years. We learned that the toxins cross the placenta and sensitize the child in utero. Then after the children were born, dust samples were done in those apartments. And these kids have now been followed for 23 years. The oldest is 23 years. So the amount of data is astounding. And so if you go to ccceh.org, you will find a lot of those study findings. And we were able to then use that data to hammer year after year, hammer the MTA. Our academic partners would come out to rallies with us. They weren't advocating, they were simply telling what the science was. And so after 18 long years, we were able to get the city to invest in hybrids, and now they're investing in electric buses. So we have to realize how long some of these issues take. We've got to be in it for the long haul. It's not about, having a couple of wins and, applauding and going back to what you were doing before. We really have to figure out how you're going to institutionalize advocacy in underserved communities. So again, that was very, very important, and it's why we've stayed in the fight for 36 years. I also wanted to say that we have been able to follow the lead of our friends and colleagues in New Jersey, who have passed a cumulative impacts law. And we now followed and passed a law in 2022. And this landmark EJ legislation ensures that the cumulative impacts of all sources of pollution are taken into consideration in the state's environmental permitting when polluting facilities are seeking permits in our communities. So it was really a historic move, making New York the second such in the nation with that law. And prior to this, no states were taking cumulative impacts of pollution to account when approving facilities. They would treat them as if they were the only source of pollution that residents would have to endure, simply giving permits facility by facility and not looking at the cumulative impact of so many facilities in one community. So we are very happy to start the rulemaking on that, and it's important when you get a bill passed that the advocates are there again to really focus on the rulemaking. How is this going to be implemented? Because we know that's everything, how enforcement is done and what the implementation is. We also passed a New York City law. It's called Local Law 154, and it's known as Gas-Free New York City. And it mandates that new buildings in the city under 7 stories are required to be all electric beginning in January, and those over 7 stories beginning in 2027. Now, this is a major win because it really prevents the burning of fossil fuels in new buildings, including gas stoves, water heaters, and boilers, which really account for about 70% of New York City's greenhouse gas emissions. I don't want to go on too long, but just say we've been active in reducing exposure to toxic chemicals, to childhood lead poisoning. Why are we still dealing with that? We did local law of 2004 years ago, and then suddenly found out that most of the law wasn't being enforced. And so we've had to pull again a coalition of all the groups working on lead, and in the last 6 years, we've had 5 new amendments around lead poisoning to really close those gaps. So again, you've heard I'm co-chair of the White House EJ Advisory Council. I have the wonderful opportunity to work with Dr. Jalonne on that. And we really provide the Biden administration with input, feedback to ensure that EJ is front and center in that work. And again, within a week of taking office, President Biden signed an executive order enacting the Justice 40 initiative, and that's actually based loosely on the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act in New York City. And Justice 40 really directs at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investment in clean energy technologies to disadvantaged communities. And the executive order also calls for the development of a climate and environmental justice screening tool that you all can access, and it identifies and defines disadvantaged communities and helps to inform where benefits should be targeted for Justice 40 across the federal government. So there have been so many new initiatives from the EPA, from the Biden administration. Certainly one is the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Program. As you know, these are funded technical assistance centers by region to really help grassroots groups, small municipalities apply for all of these billions in federal funds that are coming into our cities and states. So my organization was awarded the EPA Region 2 TIC-TAC. We're serving New York and New Jersey. And, we've learned the hard way how to successfully apply and manage federal grants, and now we're able to help other organizations do that as well. And one thing I would just like to say before closing, I co-chair the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board, and we created 2 pieces of legislation. One piece created the advisory board. The second piece of legislation basically created or gave the requirement to the city to create an environmental justice report That report came out 2 weeks ago, and I would just like to show you just a couple of slides from that report. I must tell you, I am shocked and surprised at how good the report is. I don't always, you're not always sure what government's going to come up with, but I was shocked and surprised at how good this is. So this is the study of environmental justice issues in New York. I'm just going to show you 3 or 4 pages just so you get a sense of the report. Basically talks about prioritizing, studying, acting on environmental justice. There's key findings. You have a map of the city that, again, lets people know where key facilities are. One thing that's very interesting about the report is that it gives you the top 10 neighborhoods for certain issues. And so there are many chapters to the report, around, toxins, air quality, Legionnaire's disease, waste management. And so for all of those issues, they give you the top 10 neighborhoods that are impacted. And that, again, becomes very important. And it also is just an incredible resource for the advocacy community. You can take this report and really run with it and have strong, important facts. And so, again, this one is around adult emergency visits and pediatric visits for asthma. Again, where are those top 10 neighborhoods? And so this is the last slide I'll show. And this is a project that we did called Out of Gas, In with Justice, where we worked in public housing in the Bronx to swap out gas stoves and swap in electric induction stoves and heat pumps so that we could really demonstrate, and we had before and after air monitoring with our partners at Columbia and the Rocky Mountain Institute, so that we could really document the healthy increase in air quality in people's homes after switching out these gas stoves. And a lot of people say, oh, it's better cooking with gas. And, we, at our press conference, we had a Latina and an African-American woman living in these buildings who said they loved the stove, they never wanted their gas stove back, and they were very, very happy with it. So again, we're going to have this gas ban in New York City in new construction. We've got legislation at the state level as well that is pending. So we just realized that we've got to ground our climate solutions, understanding that climate change and exposure just doesn't harm all communities equally. And to succeed, we know we've got to have collective action. We can't do any of this alone or as one organization. And we've got to understand each other, our experiences, and we've got to align our values. Otherwise, dynamics can become obstacles that really impede our progress together. And so I find that we're really challenged to develop democratically a bold national and regional climate policy agenda that really advances the goals of economic and racial, climate, and environmental justice. And we've got to have a foundation and an agenda that really helps to transform the way we work together if we're going to advance ambitious policies. So it's really time to rebuild some trust between institutions, academia, and grassroots organizations so that we can really identify the pathways for more inclusive policy. And, that's really the challenge I've accepted for the past 36 years, and it's certainly a challenge that I know you all will consider and rise to meet. So thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for allowing me to hear some of the issues that are affecting this community, because we need to advocate for each other's communities. And that's very, very important, especially those of us who may have more access than others. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for not only that look back, but also providing those lessons and collaboration, those lessons and commitment, and most importantly, those lessons and creative struggle to continue to fight into the long future. Dr. Jalonne L. White-Newsome is Senior Director for Environmental Justice for the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She succeeds Dr. Cecilia Martinez as the second person to ever hold this position in the White House, as President Biden has prioritized environmental justice across every level of government. In this historic role, Dr. White-Newsome will advise the Council's chair on environmental justice policy as she continues to help advance the Biden-Harris administration's bold and historic commitment to leverage the full focus of the federal government in advancing environmental justice. A native of Detroit, Michigan, Dr. White-Newsome has tackled environmental challenges from a wide range of positions and perspectives, including in the grassroots environmental justice movement, environmental philanthropy, state government, private industry, and academia. Most recently, she founded and led Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, a strategic consulting firm that focused on transforming communities by using people-centered solutions to combat climate change, improve public health, pursue environmental justice, and address racial equity. Prior to creating EGE Squared, Dr. White-Newsome was a senior program officer at the Kresge Foundation and created the Climate Resilience and Equitable Water Solutions Systems Initiative, the first national grant-making initiative focused at the intersection of climate change and water inequity. She also served as the first director of federal policy at We Act for Environmental Justice, managing their federal policy office in Washington, D.C. She also provided leadership for the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum on Climate Change, a national coalition of environmental justice leaders. Dr. White-Newsome's early environmental justice advocacy started in her work as a chemical engineer in private industry and remains a critical dimension of her research advocacy and advocacy related to air pollution, extreme heat and flooding, focusing in on improving the health of low-income communities of color. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome.
So the wonderful part about coming after Peggy is that I don't have to do a lot of work. So you have gotten a master class on environmental justice and the things that you need to keep top of mind if you're going to stay in this work for the marathon. And I'll just say very humbly, I'm kind of at the 800-meter mark, and Peggy's at the 3,200 meter. My daughter runs track, so this is very real for me. So again, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be in this space. Ms. Newsome, I'm glad we share that name. And I'm going to try and keep my remarks short to try and honor time. But before I jump in again, I have to, again, acknowledge the original ancestors and folks that took care of this land. I got to acknowledge the fact that this little black girl from Detroit going to the White House, it didn't happen on my own. And so very much standing on the shoulders of folks like Peggy, my parents, and other folks that have made sacrifices for me to, even be in this space. So when I think about my role now at the White House as the first federal chief environmental justice officer, I take it very seriously. And that comes from, again, growing up and realizing, not having the words to really understand what environmental justice was, but I very quickly, I spent, I guess, a couple of summers in high school working for a big chemical company, which I will not name. But long story short, I started asking questions, more than what is the standard operating procedure, or what's the PPE that we need to move this process, but why, when we're, transporting chemicals throughout the country, that spills are happening more so in communities of color, in low-income communities. And I learned that this wasn't a coincidence, but it was actually because most of the railways and the ways that you transport happen to be in these same communities. And so I continued to ask that question as I went back home to Detroit and realized that, you know, my hairdresser was in Southwest Detroit, one of the most polluted zip codes in the state of Michigan, that the babies that we took care of in our daycare centers across the city of Detroit, unfortunately, were poisoned with lead more so than the other daycare centers in the suburbs. And then, oh, by the way, my grandparents, who I was a caregiver for many years, lived in those urban heat islands that Ms. Peggy talked about, and a lot of their neighbors and the seniors that took care of me growing up were really at risk for heat in so many different ways. So again, it became really real. And I think understanding what was going on at my home, understanding that you had industries and certain corporations that didn't put people first, I went on to Northwestern University to study chemical engineering, but also major in journalism. And I was one of those crazy folks that loved to write. I was a science nerd, but I also loved research. And so really had an opportunity to understand in Chicago that a lot of these same dynamics were happening. And I published the first article on environmental racism for the Northwestern Daily, really documenting the health impacts and the struggle of people of community recovery on the south side of Chicago. And if you don't know that organization, Google them. And so again, when you talk about the folks in this room that are approaching this work and this movement from the different dimensions that you all have put together today, health, law, journalism, research, we need everybody. You know, again, this is a multidimensional issue. It's going to take all of us, our expertise and our experience, to really reach that vision, which is environmental justice, as we tackle environmental racism. So when I think about what this administration is doing, you know, we are at a moment, right? And how we use this moment is so critical. And I want to make sure that I leave you with a couple of things. So I'm going to talk briefly about what CEQ is, what we're working on at the administration, just high level, and then why, again, I still remain so hopeful in this space. And so, one, I guess, show of hands, who knows what CEQ is and what we do? Okay, so this is the reception I usually get. And so I think it's important because every opportunity, particularly as we stand in this institution, is an opportunity for education. The Council on Environmental Quality, better known as CEQ, has the mission of improving, protecting, and preserving public health and the environment. Now, we're not like a typical federal agency. We don't do grants, we don't give out money, we don't regulate, but we have an opportunity to really operationalize the president's agenda. And what's cool about this administration is that we have a president and a vice president that are very committed, that have elevated environmental justice in a way that it has never been elevated before. And so my office in particular, our Office of Environmental Justice, again, for the first time within the White House, has three main goals. One goal is to reduce burdens and harm on communities experiencing environmental injustice. The second is to make sure all these gazillions of dollars that are going out actually land in the communities that need it the most. And the third is to make sure, when I'm gone, that environmental justice is institutionalized in the policies and practices not only of the White House, but of our federal agency partners. And that is so critical. Because the work we're doing now, which I would hope you agree, it's kind of about us, but it's kind of about those generations that are coming after us. And so we have to make sure that it is solid, that it's tight, and that, again, we are in this for the long haul. So when you think about operationalizing the most ambitious environmental justice agenda that this country has ever seen, there are a couple of initiatives that our president put into place with the signing of an executive order. Ms. Peggy spoke about the Justice 40 initiative. And I know there was a question that came up in one of the earlier panels about how do you access this money? Or who do you talk to? And what I want to say is that, yes, we have the tic tacs, right? And again, I know there have been some concerns, even expressed here, you know, about, you know, how helpful they have been, or they are, right? And so again, knowing that the Tic Tacs, most of them are new and they're kind of growing and building the plane as they fly it. But I want you to know that CEQ can be a resource. And so if you all have questions about Justice 40, reach out to my office. Because one of the things that we are kind of sort of decent at is making those connections with agencies, because that's where the money is flowing out of. And so if you have a question about what Justice 40 programs might relate to what you're trying to do in your community, or what agency, or you need a contact, or you're not finding it on the website, reach out to me and we will make it happen. So that's the Justice 40 initiative in a nutshell. Again, trying to get these benefits out to communities that need them, disadvantaged communities that have been overburdened by pollution, and in my words, sometimes forgotten and invisible. So then I think the other piece that I just want to express, when we talk about, again, the importance of journalism and storytelling, part of what I find so awesome about journalism and storytelling is that you are kind of like our accountability partners, right? So when we talk about environmental justice, you cannot not talk about EJ without accountability and transparency. So a couple of the things that we have put in place to try and build out that accountability and transparency is what the president told us to do. It was create an environmental justice scorecard. Now, it is not a report card, so we're not grading our agencies. But what we're doing is we're actually reporting on how they are advancing environmental justice related to their particular mission. So whether you're the Department of Education, whether you're Veterans Affairs, whether you're the Environmental Protection Agency, there's an EJ scorecard, and I encourage you to Google it, that we published for the first time last year. It is a baseline of where our agencies are, and we are working on, with the help of comments from the public, recommendations from the WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, to make sure the phase 2 of the scorecard is even better. So that is one way, again, that we are trying to really dig into what the president upholds as a value, and that's transparency and accountability. The other thing that I want to speak to is that we have a new executive order, Executive Order 14096, revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. And there's a lot of cool things in it. How many of y'all read the text? Let me just see. Okay, so your assignment, since I'm in a kind of sort of classroom, is to Google and pull down that text. If you are doing EJ work, you need to know what our president has charged us with doing. Again, knowledge is to be able to hold not only local and state officials accountable, but us accountable. So in that document is a lot of stuff. One of the major pieces is that we actually have a definition for environmental justice. Now that might not seem like a big deal, but I'm a fake lawyer, right? And so if you're going to hold people accountable, you have to be able to go back to something. So this is the first time that we have a definition that I don't care who you are with agency, you have to subscribe to that definition. So you have to make sure that you are developing a strategic plan in a way that you are going to operationalize those values that are embedded in that executive order. So make sure you read that and understand and use that as a tool along with the scorecard to help hold us accountable, but also offer ideas and suggestions on how we can do our work better. The other piece I think that I'll raise up again is the importance of us not doing our work in an ivory tower. And when you talk about environmental justice work, I think folks have said it before, we cannot do this alone. And who's to think that just because we work in the White House, we got all the answers? That is not the case. And so as a part of the first executive order, 2 bodies were formed. And one of those bodies, I say, is kind of like our inside game, and the other body is like the outside game. So we've heard a lot about the outside game body, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I think we've heard it several times today, which is great, right? So again, no holds barred. They give us recommendations on how we're supposed to operationalize all these things the president told us to do. But again, they are also in many ways, I would say, ambassadors for the work. And they push us, which is wonderful. These are 24 presidentially appointed external stakeholders that come from all areas of the country, work in different sectors, and they are helping shape and inform the work that we're trying to do in the White House. And that's major, right? And so that's kind of our outside body helping. Inside, which a lot of folks aren't aware of, and I want to make sure that you're aware, is that we have a White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, an IAC, again, another acronym. But this group of folks are the EJ officers for every agency, but also the principals. So you have the top of these agencies and EJ officers that, again, are working to institutionalize environmental justice across the agencies. So looking at policies, looking at notice of funding opportunities, doing the community engagement, or I like to say relationship building. So again, we are creating, this IAC has been created to be a community of learning and practice to really, again, help build out the president's vision. So again, I'm going to stop there because I know we want to have conversation, and I would just say, again, we remain committed with this administration to working to make environmental justice a reality. We cannot do this without each and every one of you in this room. So whether you're a student, whether you're an aspiring lawyer, whether you're a journalist, we need you. And as I tell everybody in probably every public comment period we have, like, you know, I will go in my corner and cry, but we need your voices. So be tough, be honest, speak truth, because that is the only way that we will be able to push on the inside to get the results and the impact that you want to see on the outside. So thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah. Thank you both for your remarks, but what I want to do is really turn it over to the audience. I know there are a lot of folks here, we partners across North Carolina. This particular gathering is unique in the sense that it's sponsored across the university. I mean, from the Divinity School to the law school to environmental studies, African American studies, the Sabin Center, the college. We want to bring in the questions around knowledge and environment, but I know that there are pressing issues out with the audience because of not only what you've done, but also what is being done. I mean, we're in a large moment of an exceptional moment where we have the all of government on board for environmental justice, and that's a moment we can't waste. So, questions? Lisa.
Hi, thank you for
Yeah. Lisa. Oh. Lisa, hold on.
Don't throw it at me.
I want that. I want that guard play. There you go.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your comments and your great inspirational stories. I was truly moved by them. Ms. Shepard, I wanted to know regarding the gas stoves in New York. Did you get pushback from industry, and if so, how did you handle it?
We did not get pushback from industry. First of all, we took a lot of time to find a building where we could do this project, and we had so many private landlords who wanted to do it. But when they did the estimate on the electrification upgrades to do this, the cost was such that they pulled back. So we were very lucky that as we were looking in the Bronx, the Housing Authority was renovating some buildings. And so because of that, we were able to do this project with the Public Housing Authority. So industry was never a part of this or in contact.
Hello, Jeff Robbins. I had a comment for Peggy. And you said you were the speechwriter and worked on the Jesse Jackson campaign. In 1984, I was a freshman at Arizona State University and saw Jesse Jackson there, and actually wrote him in as my first vote at age 18 in 1984. So you had an impression that night. Jesse gave one of the best speeches I think I'd ever heard and energized me. So kudos. My question, though, is for Jalonne. In terms of, as a community-based organization, we operate across the state, and we are a Justice 40 member. Just curious if you could disclose some of the information and what went into the selection process for Tic Tacs. I understand the structure of how they were formed and how they intend to operate. Some of it is not resonating in terms of it really reaching down to community. Some of the issues relative to them having knowledge of community issues is not there. And so I just wonder, with the structure and how some of the funds have been rolled out to universities that in some cases are even a little bit detached from community, what's the administration's perspective on receiving feedback from communities that are working and looking to distribute funds to communities who are in need, but find it challenging when we receive questions about thriving communities and how to source grants and things of that nature?
So Jeff, I appreciate that question. I'll just say the disclaimer is that, again, the Tic Tacs are not run through CEQ. So
Sure.
that's of course through our partners at the Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Transportation. And so I would defer that question on selection and structure, but I would say that is not, you are not the first person that I've heard to ask those questions. Okay. And so what I normally do is I go back to my friends at EPA and I let them know that there are challenges in what I'm gonna do here and what I heard earlier. I'm gonna take that back. And I know how to find you and provide some feedback. But what I will say just in general is that, I can't speak for everybody, but the administration needs to hear that feedback. Because the whole notion or the impetus behind these Tic Tacs was that we were being responsive to what communities have told us. We don't understand this federal grant making system. It's a black box. We don't know who to talk to. We don't have back office support. You're expecting us to do, So this was supposed to be in response to concerns that, again, have been around. I mean, it's nothing new. Been around for a long, long time. Anybody trying to get money on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to hear that feedback. And again, I will commit to taking that back, and we will go from there. But thank you for raising that. And Ms. Peggy, I don't know if you have something since you operate in a Tic Tac. And what your perspective might be.
I probably at this point don't have anything that would be helpful, but I do know that we've had some issues with the grant making. What is that one called? The community exchange grants with a university that received this that has very little interaction with the community. And so the environmental justice community met with Region 2 EPA last week to protest and to suggest that as the regional director, that they should do something. And there's going to be another meeting with this now with the university and the EJ people together. And hopefully, since this is a cooperative agreement, that some of the elements that we want to see can be put into that agreement. So I would simply say that you do have a region. I'm not sure where the regional office is in this area, but you all here get together and go down to that regional office and start complaining.
One last question.
I saw a study that came out earlier this week that said that only 10% of people for whom the environment is a big concern or priority are aware of everything that the White House has done on environmental justice. So, I mean, I'm out there telling that story all the time, and I know Dr. Guidry was saying we were talking about this. So what can be done more on our end to convey that message? And then are there things that you all can step up and make sure that everyone knows how forward-leaning this administration has been on those issues?
So thank you. I tell you, I think we're making strides in a lot of ways, but I continue to feel like communication is our Achilles heel, right? So there's a couple of things. One of the reasons that I have so many miles with different airlines is because I feel like literally you have to be an EJ evangelist, because we can have tweets, we can have webinars, we can have kind of all the kind of basic forms of communication that we think we're reaching people, and we're really not. It is nothing like connecting with people face to face and having folks see a real person and be able to spread the word. So that is one way that, again, we and some of my staff try and like get out and leave DC. That's important. One of the tangible ways is, which the president launched last year as well, is the White House Campaign for Environmental Justice. And in a nutshell, when I first stepped into this role, what I heard was that, again, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the White House is doing. I have no idea. I'm clueless, whatever. And I took that to heart, right? And so the purpose of this campaign is for us in the White House to get out into community. But really, if community asks, say, we want to connect with these 3 agencies that we haven't been able to connect with. We need to have a conversation with state and local officials because they won't meet with us. So what we have tried to do through the campaign is facilitate those conversations, set those tables, bring everybody to that community. So again, you can get good information, you can connect with the sources. So we've been in LA, we've been in rural South Carolina, we've been, Detroit, Pittsburgh, I mean, we've been a lot of places. And so I would say if, again, there is a community that needs some attention, and Sherry, you done already got me in terms of Sampson County, reach out to us. And the other piece that I would say is that, we need you all to talk this up, right? I mean, the one piece that is sometimes hard, and I realize is that there's a lot of announcements, again, this being Earth Week, a lot of announcements coming out. I mean, when you talk about, again, PFAS and the first federally, I mean, you spoke to this, Will, the first standard for drinking water, ban on asbestos, Solar for All, American Climate Corp. I mean, it is a lot going on, but not everybody reads a press release, right? So I would love to understand what is a better way that we need to be getting that information out there. How can we communicate? How can we, as one of our WeJack members says, how can we make EJ sexy, right? So I would love to learn from you all as to how we can do a better job. We're using kind of the vehicles that we have, which are somewhat limited sometimes. But again, if we cannot at least let folks know what we're doing, then that's a problem. Because the other piece, for us to hopefully see another term, we have to begin to show the impact of what we are announcing. And so we need those stories. We need to know what's working. We need to know what's not working. So I encourage you to, again, let me know how we can do better. I was at NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, I think maybe a couple months after I started, because it's important, because we need more journalists, which is why I was excited to be here, to write the stories and to help us tell the story that I hope this administration will be able to tell, as we come to the end of this first term. So help us.
Yeah, I would say that the media has really fallen down on its job. CNN, MSNBC, which a lot of people do look at, it's Trump, 24 hours a day. I said, the big green groups, they do certain things. They're not even on TV. I was in a room with the green groups, and they have all this money. They have 100 people doing communications, and they're not on TV. So how do we do that? Where are those call-in radio shows we used to have? I think a lot of our communities still have those. Another thing we've done is to do tours. We do toxic tours all the time for groups to come through. And then we did some Justice 40 tours, where we brought federal officials to talk about all of the money and the new initiatives, and to meet with local electeds, and to do a tour of the community concerns. And that has proved very popular. I remember we did one in Houston, and HUD and HHS came, and they were stunned, because some of these people had never been out of the office. And they were stunned at what they saw. at the Ship Channel in Houston and asked if they could bring 10 more people back from their staff to look at it. So again, I think we also have to be a little more creative about getting people to come see our reality. And I'm sure you all are doing some of that, but we have to consistently do it. So again, the media bears a lot of responsibility. They just aren't telling the story. And so we've got to find those other ways.
Join me in thanking our keynote speakers.